welcome to breakout session 2. For those of you who haven't met, I'm Erica Flores, a resource specialist with the Long Island ARBERN. If you've been here with us all morning, you've probably already seen this slide at least twice, so I am not going to belabor it. And again, you've probably seen this one at least twice, but I just want to point out how to join our listserv if you are looking for a constant flow of updates of upcoming professional development, but also regulatory guidance. As we receive it, we share it out with the region, but also link to our YouTube channel. So you can keep up with your own on-demand professional development there. So again, we just want to thank you for choosing to be here in breakout session 2. I want to introduce our presenter for today. And we have with us Jennifer Hall. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for being here with us for the session titled Let's Get Loud, Developing Speaking and Listening Skills in the Classroom. I know that we all saw Let's Get Loud, we saw the name Jennifer, we just sort of assumed it'd be Lopez, but we are still glad to have you here with us, Jennifer. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that you can take over.
Great, thank you so much, Erica. I am going to share my screen now. And hello, I'm seeing a few familiar faces. Lizette, hey. There we go. All right. Good morning, everyone. This morning's session with Dr. Medina was amazing. I just wanted to say that out loud. I love him. So I'm not sure if I can bring the same energy level as he can, but I'm going to try my best. Welcome to Let's Get Loud, Developing Speaking and Listening Skills in the Classroom. Thank you to Erica, Kelly Codera, and the Long Island Teacher Institute folks for having me this morning. Today's session, 45 minutes is quick, so I'm going to try to get it all in, all the things that I want to share, but overall, today's session is really about taking the curriculum that you already have, you're already using, and embedding more opportunities for our multilingual learners and really all students to engage with academic content through oral discussion while supporting that linguistic load. And I do want to get just an energy level quick check here. I just want to know, what kind of energy level do I need to bring to this session today? And this is kind of something I encourage everyone to do with their students at the top of a lesson, at the top of a block, just a really great check-in, but also good visual support for multilingual learners as well. If you're wanting to get that quick check-in with folks, how are they feeling today? So on a scale of sheep, how are you feeling today? You can drop it in the chat. We've got a really wide variety here. We've got 7s, we've got 1s, 8s, 6s, 2s, some 4s. All right, so we're a little all over. And if you Google feeling scales on the internet, if you haven't already done so, you can find a variety of these types of fun scales to do with students, especially ones that are related to pop culture and TV shows that are more relatable to our students as well. I personally really enjoy the Schitt's Creek ones, but they're really funny. All right, so just really quick about me, because 45 minutes is not a long time in this space. I've been in multilingual learner education for a decade now. The minute I graduated from school, I knew that that was the community I wanted to work with. I'm half Mexican. Actually, speaking of Dr. Jose Medina, I've actually been trained by him in Guatemala when I was working at a dual language school, and we're also from our families are from similar places. I think he said Chihuahua, Mexico, which is where my mom's family's from. But anyway, I've held various roles. I've been in the classroom as a classroom teacher teaching multilingual learners. I've been a specialist specifically in Nashville for the public school district there. I supported schools who were just getting their L programming off and running. And then prior to moving to New York and joining the collaborative, where I'm currently the multilingual learner specialist, I served at a charter school on their leadership team, L coordinator. We had 60% Ls at that charter school. And most of my experience is in the elementary space, but I've had experience in the middle school and secondary space as well. So I'll be providing examples in all grade levels. But I can't promise that my middle school secondary expertise is on point, but I do have the experience there. I love starting my sessions with setting intentions. Really we're here for our students and supporting our students, but also developing ourselves as well. But this is why most folks do what we do, right? It's for the kids. So consider to whom you would like to dedicate this learning to and why today. And I've provided some linguistic supports if needed. I know it's kind of a dreary day, our minds might be a little foggy. So there's some sentence frames there for you if you'd like to use, and you can respond in the chat. Oh, I see some Nashville love. I love these. I'm not going to read them out loud, but I always enjoy seeing these, especially in this virtual space. It's a great peek into your classrooms and your students. Great. I'm seeing a lot of just asset-based mindset here in terms of dedications, really recognizing that our multilingual learners are working really hard and they do deserve equal participation in education. Great. You can keep those coming in. I'm going to go ahead and move on really quickly. Objectives. I have a pretty ambitious schedule for 45 minutes, but I'm going to try my best. You all are receiving a copy of the slide deck. I've dropped the Padlet link in there at the top. If you were joining us later, I'll drop it again. I know the chat is kind of tricky that way, but you can always go back to these slides after this session. So in general, today, I'm just hoping that at the end of this session, this quick 45 minutes, you'll feel comfortable in identifying and explaining effective scaffolds and supports for engaging our multilingual learners in speaking and listening activities in the classroom. And then hopefully you'll apply some lessons learned to an upcoming lesson plan or activity after you leave the session. And again, the link is here. It's hyperlinked in the PowerPoint slides as well that you have received already in the Padlet. And I know that the Long Island Institute folks have also shared it in their Padlet as well. Really quick reflection question. Why do you think speaking and listening activities are especially important for our multilingual learners? And you can respond in the chat. Increasing confidence, yes. Yeah, often, and just kind of speaking to a lot of folks are saying that increasing confidence, that effective filter goes up for our multilingual learners, where often teachers that might not have a multilingual learner lens might not really embed those supports for our students in terms of reducing that linguistic load. And so it's really scary when a multilingual learner is entering our newcomer students, they don't have that vocabulary there, and they're asked a question, everyone's staring at them, that effective filter flies right up. It can be a very intense moment for students, but also really scary. So definitely providing these linguistic supports and practicing oral language will definitely improve confidence and make those moments less scary. I'm seeing a lot of great stuff coming in the chat. To understand teachers in class to increase their confidence. Students have to take risks in listening and speaking activities, right? And along with taking those risks, it's about creating that environment where taking those risks really feel comfortable for our multilingual learners as well. Great. And so as we really talk about why is it important to focus on on oral language with our multilingual learners and really all of our students, it's all about reading and writing, right? Writing and reading really flow on a sea of talk. It's directly correlated to oral language. If you really, I like to say, if you can't say it, you probably can't read it, and vice versa. And so oral discussion really, really is important and vital for our multilingual learners, and really providing those opportunities to hear and practice key content vocabulary, which in turn will make that academic content much more stickier for our multilingual learners. What does the research say? So this graphic really emphasizes the importance of including student interaction in the classroom. Whoever is talking the most is learning the most. So if you're the teacher who is taking up 75% of that lesson, really you're the one that's been learning that entire lesson as opposed to your students. And so we really want to aim for this bottom portion of this learning pyramid where we're creating moments and designing moments where our students are discussing with each other. They're listening to their peers use that academic vocabulary. They're practicing that academic vocabulary with each other, social vocabulary as well. And then the ultimate, of course, is they're teaching each other. That's, I think, all of our goal at the end of a lesson is that eventually our students are teaching. But this is just a great, I love this graphic, and just reminding ourselves the importance of more student talk versus teacher talk. And if you get nothing from this session, I like to call this, at least take this away, I like to call this the 50-50 rule, where teacher talk only takes up 50% of the lesson and student talk takes up the other 50%. And when I say student talk takes up the other 50%, I don't mean you're talking the first 50% of the lesson and students are talking the second half. We're really embedding throughout the lesson these moments of engagement and reflection out loud. And brain science shows too, if you're saying and naming new learnings out loud, it is much more stickier. The brain retains that information and content longer. And of course, I can't talk about oral language without mentioning Bix and Kelp. Of course, Bix is our social language. Some folks like to call it survival English. I like to just call it everyday talk. And that's really where our students develop language first. That's not just our multilingual learners, that's children in general, that's human beings in general. This is the language that we use really every day, most of our lives, as opposed to that academic language. And this is really going to develop first for our multilingual learners, as opposed to that academic language, or what we like to call that CALP language. And I also want to just recognize here too, this is just a fault of the American education system. We're like constantly in these ELL, ESL programs trying to get students to exit out of services as quickly as possible. That's the goal. But in reality, it takes up to 7 years for some students to develop academic vocabulary in a new language. And so this idea of rushing students to exit is just so silly to me, because they need the time, which is why it's so important to provide these at-bats with oral language development in the classroom. And as I continue to build a little bit more background and context here, I did want to talk about the importance of the New York State standards. New York State is moving towards the implementation of the next generation learning standards. And I just wanted to note some of the implications here with those standards. A being, here are the skills that these learning standards really ask students to do, which is obtain information, analyze, form an opinion, defend an opinion with evidence, evaluate, and build off others' ideas. All of these skills really require a strong foundation and understanding of academic vocabulary. All of these require students to use that part of the brain that requires students to really use and tap into the oral at-bats that they've had to use prior to during those lessons. When we're defending an opinion and we're using evidence, that really goes back to those discussions and practice time that we had in class during debate, building off each other's ideas. Again, it's so important to practice that during classroom time. Because these state tests are asking students to do that in the productive writing pieces. So just some things to think about there as we talk about the importance of including those different moments of interaction and engagement orally in the classroom. And of course, just the final bullet here is students have to practice these skills and this language and vocabulary orally first in order to do it in writing. And really quickly here, I just wanted to go over the beware of the just good teaching myth here. So practices that are essential for multilingual learners often benefit all students, right? I often say that to a lot of the schools that I work with. This really great activity that you're using with your multilingual can also work with your students with disabilities, but the opposite isn't always true, right? And so I just wanted to provide a quick example of what that means. So here's just a quick example of an instructional coach and a teacher conversation that might happen. So Mike is an ELA coach. He observes Jessica teaching and gives her the following feedback. There's too much teacher talk in your lessons. You've probably heard that a thousand times. I was definitely guilty of it when I was classroom-based. Together, they decide to build in at least 2 think pair shares into her next lesson. And this is a great way to engage students, a great cooperative learning moment for students. But is it going to be enough for our multilingual learners? We're going to ask our multilingual learners to turn and talk. They most likely are going to get stuck if they're an entering or a newcomer student that hasn't built that academic vocabulary. That affective filter might fly up immediately when they're asked to turn and talk to a peer. And so how can we build in some deeper supports there linguistically? And so Jessica and our coach Mike, they think through the possible barriers and corresponding scaffolds for those multilingual learner students so that they can participate equally in that think, pair, share. And so they decide to incorporate a teacher model, right? That visual piece, and then also using sentence stems for both partners. So not just for our multilingual learners, but for both students to be able to have that access point into engaging in this oral discussion or think, pair, share. Some idea sentence stems that they came up with were I think, I agree, I disagree, can you tell me more about? And models and stems are really, of course, a great way to reduce that linguistic load for our multilingual learners, but really they're good for all students. And so I've built some background here. We're going to get into more stickier strategies, but I'd love to know what is something that is resonating with you so far and why? You can type in the chat. So some folks are thinking students must practice orally before being able to write it. The focus on language frames, considering needed scaffolds, deeper supports. Great, thanks for sharing. Seeing the 50-50 strategy. All right, so let's continue to build our toolkit and help promote student interaction in our classroom. So when I say interaction, what I mean is not the round robin share out. So often folks will do these think pair shares or round robin structures. And really this only provides opportunities for students to provide output. So these are strong instructional practices, but they don't really challenge our students. And we really want to live in the interaction space. And so that really requires 2 or more students to work together to co-construct meaning. And so, for example here, and this is more of a secondary example, but maybe you have students decide which of the many causes of the French Revolution was most important, with students not only proposing an idea, but they're marshaling evidence, they're challenging each other, they're encouraging each other to elaborate, add on more, and then of course, building on each other's ideas. And so that's the difference between just output versus interaction. And we want all of our students to be interacting, even our multilingual learners, right? Because they should also be able to equally participate in the rigor of the lesson. And so output really isn't enough. We want to live in the interaction space. Wanted to give another just couple examples of what that might look like, output versus interaction, and then I'm going to provide some ideas of linguistic supports for our multilingual learners. And so when we think about lower elementary, you probably often have the turn and tell your partner about your drawing. A great way to deepen that is to add on and ask what you could add. Ask your partner what they could add. And partners can ask each other questions about what's in their drawing and why, and of course, provide suggestions of what they might add. In terms of upper elementary or even secondary classrooms, maybe you're reading an article that discusses the causes of the American Revolution with your partner. Maybe this is a turn and talk situation. To go deeper and to make this more interactive, maybe you're adding on, determine which was the most significant cause and explain why. Doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. This is about students really engaging in academic content more rigorously. So, of course, we have to understand that our multilingual learners, this is going to be hard. That interaction space is going to be difficult. So how can we support them in this so that they can participate equally in that interaction space? Some possible scaffolds here that we can provide our students would be explicit modeling, providing some visual reference tools, word banks or question banks are always really helpful. Maybe you provide that home language option. We also have to recognize that our newcomer and entering students, maybe they're even new to the country, their repertoire of vocabulary just hasn't been built in English yet. And so there's nothing wrong with letting them engage in this type of activity in their home language where they feel comfortable. They're still interacting with the content on grade level. They're just doing it in another language. Maybe you do a trio instead of a pair, and you can certainly have home language buddies, and then partnering with a teacher, of course, if a student really needs high levels of support, partner with a teacher is fine too. In terms of upper elementary, very similar scaffolds. I would, of course, maybe add a graphic organizer where maybe students, as they're reading this article, they're able to keep track of the different causes that they're reading about. And so when they get to this conversation with their peers, they have something to reference as they're talking. They already have some linguistic supports there already ready. Again, explicit modeling, the home language option, sentence starters, of course, and then a conference with the teacher prior to peer interaction. This could certainly also be with the specialists. I know a lot of schools here in New York City have very, specialists that are in their buildings. And so this could be maybe a prep conversation in small group prior to an engagement activity like this, where we're prepping our students on the academic language they might need to use, the sentence stems that they might be engaging in. And just that rehearsal time too really helps with that effective filter for our multilingual learners. All right, so I'm going to check out the chat, and I'd love for us to just reflect for a moment here. What about interaction versus output is resonating with you, and how can the instructional method of interaction support the language acquisition of our multilingual learners? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, and you can go ahead and respond in the chat. All right, just going to read a few. Looks like modeling constructive dialogue is so helpful for students. Absolutely. You can do sentence frames and put in different supports. Adding the ask part of the turn in talk, going deeper into those great instructional strategies. Home language option. Great, thanks for those shares. All right, so how do we address these barriers for our multilingual learners during speaking and listening activities? I've provided just a few scaffolding ideas, but right now I'm going to address, as I finish this presentation, I'm going to go into 4 practices that I feel really support the design of engagement activities with that multilingual learner lens. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is come to the discussion prepared. So that's not only for our students, but also for the instructor as well. So to support the concept of anticipating the potential misunderstandings of our multilingual learners prior to a unit launch, prior to an engagement activity, these are just a couple resources that I've provided from one of my favorite people, an organization, Support Ed, Diane Fenner. Love her, love everything that she does. She always creates these really great resources. These 2 in particular are just a great way for you as the instructor, when you sit down and are deciding on an instructional design and choices for supports. This is just a great activity checklist. What are those academic language need to know words that my students might need support in, and where am I actually building in those engagement opportunities for my students, and how am I supporting the linguistic load? Maybe you only use this for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then eventually it just becomes second nature, because I know that you're probably have a binder full of checklists that point to different skills as an instructor in lesson design. And so I always tell folks, these are such great tools to use for a short period of time, and then eventually it just becomes second nature. Right, practice makes perfect. Going back to the idea of modeling, and just to tell you, those 2 Support Ed documents are in the Padlet for you. Modeling first, providing a model is such a powerful thing for our multilingual learners, and really all students. It provides a clear understanding of what's the end goal here. It, of course, provides that visual reference, and we should always be modeling, even in the secondary space, what are those oral activities supposed to look like when we're engaging them as a student? And so some ideas for modeling here could, of course, be the teacher modeling. I always prefer to have a couple students model for their peers. And of course, in small group with a specialist prior to activity, which goes back to coming to the discussion prepared. Sometimes our entering and newcomer students just need a little extra coaching so that they don't feel so nervous and scared to engage in an oral engagement activity, which can be really quite scary. If you're a language learner, I've been a Spanish language learner my entire life, it feels, and I still get really nervous before I'm asked to speak in Spanish in an engagement activity or an interaction activity. Really quick here, I would love to share this video. It's on front-loading vocabulary at the top of the unit. But what I love about this particular video is it really shows some really key supports for students in terms of the linguistic load of lessons that they are going to be able to use this entire unit that this teacher is working on with these young students. I will say this is a lower elementary classroom, but certainly a lot of these strategies can translate to any grade level, and we'll talk about that after the video. And so I wanted to share a few minutes, and then I don't think we'll get to the second video that I have planned for you all because I knew this 45 minutes would fly by. But as we watch this video, I would love for you just to reflect on what are those instructional strategies, those academic language strategies that the teacher is utilizing during this lesson.
Okay. Okay, time to put the book back. Okay, yeah.
My name is Carmen Ngang. I'm the preschool teacher in Kaiming Head Start Sunset Center.
Everybody do your share.
We have 85% of children come from Asian family. Most of the family don't speak English at home. So the children come here to learn English.
I have something sounds like oi, oi, oi. A pig.
We read the book Silly Sally. So first we introduce what's this story about. So I introduced the name of the animal like pig, dog, loon, and sheep. So we use stuffed animal to emphasize that.
I also have something which sounds like woof, woof, woof. Guess what's that? A dog.
We will focus on the vocabulary we want the children to learn. So we will repeat it and emphasize that.
And let's see, what do I have? Oh, right here. Silly Sally.
We use the book also to introduce different kind of word about movement.
You know what silly means? What silly means?
It means you're being funny.
It's very funny. Can you guys make a silly face? A very silly face.
I use TPR, total physical response. This helps the children that when they do the movement, so they can have hand-on experience when they learn a new vocabulary.
Silly Sally went to town, walking backward, upside down. So on the way, she met a pig, and they danced a jig.
Because she's a dancer.
Because she's the dancer, maybe.
We encourage them to make prediction. We ask them to guess what will be happen next and what do they see. So let them involve to the story.
See, what guess next? What's next?
She met a dog.
She met a dog. What the dog? What she do with the dog? They play leapfrog.
We read the book with all the different kind of movement. So when we talk about the movement, for example, like leapfrog, when we would do the movement in front of the children. Many children don't know the English word, so we use the prop so they can see the picture. We have the word in English and in Chinese. So when they see the picture and the word together, so it helps them to remember.
When she met the pig, what the pig does? Dance a jig. This is dance a jig. Dance a jig. Dance a jig.
This helps the children that when they do the movement, so they can have hand-on experience when they learn a new vocabulary.
Now, what this guy doing?
Brooks walking backward upside down.
Upside down. Can you do this movement? Can you walk backward and upside down? Backward, backward, backward.
It's one of the strategies to help us, to help people to learn second language. So when they hear the word and we do the movement at the same time, we understand that movement is the word we have just spoken.
And the next one is what the little dog does.
All right, so we're not going to go in breakout rooms because we certainly don't have the time. But in the chat real quick, what were some of the instructional strategies that the teacher used in the video to create access to that academic vocabulary for her multilingual learner students? TPR, yes. Props and realia, translations, visuals, and all of these strategies can translate from lower elementary to the secondary classroom, right? We can use visuals, we can use realia and props, we can use bilingual labels, and TPR especially. And I know that sounds funny, but I'm going to actually talk about what that would look like in the secondary space. Oops. And my screen's doing funny things. Let me fix that. There you go. And so for those that might be not so familiar with what TPR is, it was something that began in the 1960s based on Dr. James Asher's research, really with monolingual English-speaking families and how their infants developed language and just how folks in general developed English. And so what he noticed in his research, it was always the students that built the biggest repertoire of vocabulary were those that were combining a gesture with a vocabulary word. And it's over the years, it's become this really great strategy for teaching world languages and any second language. And the whole idea is to take a vocabulary word that needs to know vocabulary and combining it with a gesture. And when you combine those two things, you're using two different parts of the brain, which in turn then creates deeper retention of that vocabulary. And so I'm not going to show the secondary video, but it is provided to you in the Padlet. What's really great, what I love about this video, it's a secondary example because I think most folks feel a lot more comfortable using TPR in the lower elementary classroom because it's fun, it's silly, it gets students moving, but it's so important to also get our students moving and feeling silly in the secondary space as well. This particular video of TPR is it's a high school classroom, and it's funny because this teacher is so high energy and I love her, but you'll watch the students kind of like go, we have to do these movements, but as the class in the block goes on, you see them start to have fun, they start to laugh at each other, and they're going to remember that moment forever. And they're going to remember those gestures that are associated with that vocabulary and vice versa forever because that moment was so memorable for them and that they were having fun while learning. Again, super impactful strategy for multilingual learners using TPR. And so we could certainly watch that on your own. This is just a really quick sample sequence that I wanted to provide in the classroom. Certainly the sequence doesn't have to be in one day. This might be the life of your unit. So this might be over a couple weeks, over a month. So just the quick example I wanted to share. My content objective is students will be able to identify and sequence in order the stages of metamorphosis in the life cycle of the butterfly. The language objective here, which I encourage all folks to use, not just with our multilingual learners, because all of our students are learning language. They're all being asked to produce language in some way or another. And so here the language objective is students will be able to orally use the key vocabulary to describe the life cycle of a butterfly in order or in sequence. And so here my suggestion, and it doesn't have to be what you do, because I'm always say you're the lead actor or actress of your classroom. You do it the way that feels right for you as the instructor and what's best for your students. But this is what I would do. Teacher displays the life cycle graphic without any labels. And as you're introducing this need to know vocabulary, you're also introducing the movements. Certainly in the secondary classroom, you might actually let students create the movements themselves to create more buy-in. Whereas with our younger students, it might make more sense to provide them with the movement. And then we would have students listen first, then you would invite them to use the movements after the initial introduction. As more language is added throughout the unit, you're having students engage in small group activities. do, going through those receptive-like activities, those at-bats with the language, that need-to-know vocabulary. They're using the gestures to really tap in to that prior knowledge, that knowledge that you've taught them about the stages of metamorphosis of a butterfly. And so the end goal here isn't memorization. It's that we want students to eventually be able to retell the life cycle to their peers in pairs or small groups independently, using those movements to help guide them. All right, this is a strategy I know most of you are familiar with, but definitely wanted to add it to this slide deck. If we want to elicit more language, we have to provide those linguistic supports for our students, especially our entering and newcomer multilingual learners. So sentence frames are a great way to do that. Not only does it provide that guidance and support so that they can provide more than that 1 or 2 word response, it's also a great way to get them to add on more, create those more complex sentence structures. I mean, I can't mention complex sentence structures without mentioning NYSESLAT, which is such a difficult test. That test requires our multilingual learners to use complex sentence structures. And so it's so important to provide those structures to students, even if they're not necessarily producing them themselves. If you provide them a frame that is in a complex sentence structure, it's going to provide them that sample until they're comfortable being able to independently create those structures on their own. And it's providing them that chance to advance their own language skills with some support. All right, I know I only have a few minutes left, so I'm actually not going to, this is just a kind of an overview of what we've talked about, but I'm going to move on to this slide. I'm not going to spend much time here. It's just about using appropriate body language and in participating in oral language discussion. I think here it's also recognizing to just the respectful ways that students can engage in oral discussion. I know often during debate, things can get quite, just can be quite tense, right? And so really teaching students ways to interact with each other respectfully is important, but also when it comes to body language, understanding our students' cultural backgrounds. Some cultures, it is not appropriate to be looking at folks in the eyes. Maybe not appropriate to look at someone in the opposite, but that's the opposite sex with eye contact. So just understanding where our students are coming from, where their cultures are coming from, when you are creating norms and expectations of oral engagement activities, just being aware of who is in the room, right? And so here I want to move on to participate by taking turns. So often our students struggle sometimes with this. We know we have our students that love talking, but then sometimes our multilingual learner students tend to get ignored because they're maybe timid to be a part of the conversation, or they're not sure how to enter that conversation. Maybe they haven't been provided those access points to equally participate. And so these are just some quick suggestions on how we can provide those opportunities of access for all students to engage in oral discussion. So we can certainly use a talking stick or a talking rock during larger group discussions, teach and model the strategies for inviting someone into the conversation. Often our students don't know how to do that. And especially if maybe they're not used to being with a student that speaks another language other than English. So they don't really have the strategies of how do I invite my peer into this conversation? So teaching all of our students those kind of entry points into inviting a student into their oral engagement activity. Of course, visuals, graphic organizers, manipulatives, realia, all really great supports for our students, and then anchor charts. Finally, making connections. So students not only need to be able to share their own thoughts and opinions, but they also need to be able to interact with the ideas and opinions of others. So it's important that we model for students how to build on the ideas of others. So kind of going back to that point of how are we providing students the skills to invite each other and participate in an academic conversation respectfully? And so I love talk moves. Not only are they providing students with entry points into a conversation, but it's also providing them models of how to invite others into the conversation and participate in a debate or any type of discussion respectfully. I have a video in the Padlet for you to watch on this that goes a little bit more deeply into what talk moves are. So definitely encourage you to watch that after this session. And it's also in the Padlet for you as well. All right, I'm just checking my time here. And so I'm going to skip this reflection question and go to this slide here. These are just some additional, let me fix this. Some additional scaffolding supports for oral activities. So kind of reiterating what I said before, graphic organizers, word walls, banks, English or bilingual glossaries, home language materials, or that home language option, I think should always be there for our students. I think that's thinking more strengths-based. Sometimes our students just need to speak in their home language. That's what they feel more comfortable in. That's fine. If we're still engaging in the content, we're still meeting the objective, why can't they speak in their home language? Of course, reducing the linguistic load. And there, I just want to make the point, if the linguistic load is really high in a lesson, lots of talk and discussion, I would have the cognitive load be just a little bit lower and vice versa. So it's a balance in terms of instructional design. And of course, student grouping is always a great way to support students. You know those students who are in your classroom that love to help. They're probably future educators themselves. Let them be paired up with our students that struggle a little bit more in this oral language space. And then there are a couple other student grouping ideas there as well. And then finally, tracking progress of our students, especially their oral language progress. I always encourage folks to use the nicest thought rubrics. You can observe your students maybe once a month, informally score them against the speaking rubric on their responses during class time. Such a great way to measure the progress, and it's a free way. I know a lot of folks are looking to like the different tech out there that they can use to progress monitor language acquisition. Here's a free way that you can progress monitor. So just wanted to point that out. Also in the Padlet, you have some more cooperative learning strategies that I've provided, some Kagan strategies. Of course, being aware of that just good teaching myth, we do need to go a little bit deeper to support the linguistic loads of our students. And just to end the session today, what is one strategy or tool that I've shared with you today that you would like to add to your teacher toolkit and maybe try tomorrow in your classroom? You can respond in the chat. I see movement, TPR, sentence frames, the 50-50 rule, talking sticks. Great. Thanks for sharing, everyone. And thank you so much for sticking with me. I know I went over a few minutes, but I appreciate all of you, everything that you do. You have the hardest job ever. And I don't say that lightly.
Thank you.